Thanks for joining in tonight. My name is Charity Rouse. I'm the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Library System. And it is my delight to welcome you to our genealogy series. And we will be talking about getting started with basic records or reviewing those early finds. I did find when I was putting together this recording that I had a record that I looked at and went, oh, they were neighbors. So, when we get there, I'll tell you more of that story. But whether you are just getting started in genealogy or have been doing genealogy for a while, it's always good to revisit those early records and early types of records that you may have looked at and you didn't know all of the distant family names. You might have missed something because you just didn't know that piece of information was important. So, some of the first records we look for in genealogy can be very valuable then, when we first see them, as well as when we revisit them later. So, these are things like vital records, probate, obituaries, census, and land. So, in South Carolina, where do you get vital records? Well, 20th century records, marriages after July of 1911, births and deaths after January 1915. Um, it used to be DHEC. Now they've divided it, and it's now the South Carolina Department of Public Health. And they have the vital records there. The website is the left-hand link on the screen, and it is on your handout as well. The handout is linked in the chat in Zoom. If you are watching this on a delay, feel free to contact us in the Kennedy room and we will send you that link. Um, the other place that records are starting to be available is the South Carolina Electronic Records Archive, SCARA, and that is the right-hand address there. They use Preservica, which is a back-end archives management system. Um, but SCDAH, South Carolina Department of Archives and History. Now, most of the only vital records that are actually in that, although there are additional records in that group of records, uh, are birth records, 1915 to 1924. They release birth and death records on a yearly basis in typically somewhere January, February, March after the year is finished. So, 1925 records, births and deaths, will be available sometime in the spring of 2026. We're still waiting on our microfilm of the death records for 24, but eventually we'll get them. The birth records are only being released through the Electronic Records Archive. Other states are different in how they release records. So take a look at whichever state you're looking at. Do know that there is a delay. Um, in many states, not all, but many states, there's a 100-year embargo on birth certificates. Um, Death certificates, Virginia does 25 years, South Carolina does 50 years, and Georgia does 75 years from time of death. So it just depends on the state you're looking for. Marriages in South Carolina are still held at the county level, although a portion of from I think 1953 to 2022 or something are available through the state Department of Public Health. The other ones before and after that are available at the county level. Not all counties have allowed their records to be put online. Spartanburg County is one of the ones that you literally have to go in person to the probate court's office and pay your, I think it's still $5 I didn't check that. Um, Cash or check, maybe money order, but yeah, I don't think they take credit cards. So they make it a little difficult to find. So, but we're going to dive into things to look for in each of these types of records. So some things to look for on birth records: the name of the child, although sometimes you get infant or just no first name. Um, in that case, you may need to look for an amended birth certificate later that, when they needed something that actually proved their name for like a driver's license or a passport, sometimes those had to be amended. A birth date, that's definitely going to be on a birth record. The location of the birth. Sometimes you get the address of family. The names of the parents are always on there. Um, and then birthplaces of parents are sometimes there, occupations of parents are sometimes there. The name of the informant who gave the information, is it the doctor, the midwife, the father, the grandfather, the neighbor? And then the name of the doctor or midwife is typically on the records. Um, and I love that baby picture of my dad and my grandmother. So you may find that there is a birth register held at the county level. Um, we do have a very brief parts of the 1890s and 1900s Spartanburg City birth register and death register. This one happens to be an example from Virginia, from Ancestry, and birth registers started in 1853 in Virginia and ran till 1911, kind of. There was a gap between the mid 1890s and 1911. Um, Virginia started their birth registrations certificates program in 1912. So, but this is what the register looks like. It is literally a listing of all of the births in that county in that time period, and this was then sent into the state. This is a blown up version of just the top of the um, page. This is for Accomack County over on the Eastern Shore, St. George's Parish, um, number 2 district within it. And it says the John Grant was Commissioner of Revenue, year ending 31st December 1879. And the top row is just the listing for Elizabeth Bennett. She's the third one down there, July 15th, 1879. She is white, female, born alive in Accomack County, so you will also see stillbirths registered here. To Thomas H. Bennett, farmer, and then on the bottom line it continues and he was born in Accomack County, or he lives in Accomack County. His wife is Georgie Bennett, Georgiana. I've seen so many variants of her name. And it is a single birth, not twins. There were twins on that page. And then the informant was Thomas H. Bennett, the father. So you can get good information from that. You always have to make sure you're following the same line across the page. This is an example of a cousin of mine, about third cousin. In the South Carolina Vital Records birth certificate. So in the South Carolina Electronic Records Archive, they have birth certificates there between 1915 and 1924 now. This happens to be from 1922. You do need to go through the process to find out the certificate number. There are indexes available. It's a little clunky, but they're getting better. But then on the right, you can blow it up and actually see the full certificate. And you get things like the county of the place of birth, which was Richland County in Columbia, which is not the family's address. Not sure why they were in Columbia at that time, but Charles Frew Jr. But you do get the address of the family, the usual address, and it's a boy. It's not a triple or twin or triplet. Um, and then you get the date of birth, 1922. You get the name of the father, permanent post office or present post office of the father. So they're actually living in Rock Hill. They just happen to be in Columbia for the birth. And the color of race, age at last birthday of the parents, the occupations of the parents, um, and then um, the signature stating that this child was born alive at 5:15 p.m. and the name of the physician or midwife. And then you get at the bottom the clerk who's registering it. So, some things to look for in marriage records. Just as a review here, the names of bride and groom, ages of bride and groom, locations, so where they live, where they were born, where they're getting married. Sometimes those are all the same, and sometimes they're very different. Um, Sometimes you get names of parents or guardians, particularly if one or the other or both are underage. You get the date of the license return and certificate. Sometimes all you have is the date of the license, and there's no way to know, did they get married that day? Did they wait a couple weeks? Did they never actually get married? Typically people follow through, but I have seen some that got cold feet and did not go through with the actual marriage. Who officiated? Were they a court official? Were they a clergy person? Is it a register similar to the birth register we looked at? Is it a license and return? So two pieces, the license the clerk gives you, and you take it to the court official or clergy person, um, uh, or whoever is authorized to do a wedding, perform a wedding. There's a bond, particularly earlier years in Virginia, among other places. You have a bond that the groom and someone who will attest and back him up says, if there is some reason that I can't get married to this woman, I forfeit this bond, this money to the state. Um, Certificate, that's usually what's signed and handed to the couple at the time of the marriage. Or is it another type of record? Because, you can have marriages and births and deaths written in Bibles as well, family Bibles. So this is a Spartanburg, South Carolina marriage that took place in 1936. It is a friend of mine's grandparents. The story goes they had eloped years before this, and got married when they came through Spartanburg County. Well, in 1936, things were getting rocky, and they had kids, and they wanted to make sure the kids were legitimate. And for the divorce, they needed a copy of their wedding license, marriage license, and oops, it didn't get filed, or it never happened. An elopement, who knows? And so they came back to Spartanburg County because they had told everyone they got married in Spartanburg County. And they got married in 1936 in Spartanburg County. And you will see there, they are from Atlanta, Georgia. They're 27 years old, each of them, and they're Caucasian. They're American in nationality. Now, always check for the back of whatever document you're looking for, because sometimes you get extra information and sometimes there's just two sides of it. And so this is the return. that says, in the clerk's office, Dewey Foster performed the marriage ceremony for the within named persons at Spartanburg, South Carolina on the 28th day of March, 1936. And then you get the signatures of the various parties and the filing date. Now, you may notice in the top right-hand corner, this does say microfilmed. Yes, the clerk's office did microfilm some of these. They just won't share it with anyone outside of their office. So, we live in fear. When things are only recorded in one place and not backed up, that's just a recipe for disaster. But eventually, we may be able to help them safeguard their um, marriage information, among other things. So, some things to look for on divorce records. Just as a reminder, in South Carolina, divorce was illegal for a significant part of the history. South Carolina allowed divorce between 1872 and 1878 during Reconstruction. I still haven't found actual paperwork for some of my ancestors who may have gotten divorced during that time. It would be on the county level. Not many actually happened in that period. And then, before that, you had to actually petition the state legislature. A number of people petitioned it, so you may see a petition in the records of the legislature, but they never did actually let anyone get divorced prior to April 15th, 1949, when our current divorce law went into effect, other than that short period of time in the 1870s. But on a divorce, you typically find the names of the bride and groom, their ages, locations, where they live now, where they were born, where they got married, when they got married, and a reason for the divorce. Unfortunately, I still haven't gotten my hands on a South Carolina divorce record. So, I don't have an example for you. Still looking. Death records. Death records have a few more options of where you find them. But if you're talking about an actual death certificate, you're looking for the names of the decedent, the person who died, spouse, parents, age, locations where they lived, where they were born, where they died, where their parents were born is a location often requested on a death certificate. The name of the informant. This is important. Some informants are very reliable. They know the information. Some informants are deep in grief and just are spouting out who knows what. I have a death certificate in North Carolina for a great great grandmother, and the granddaughter of that great great grandmother was giving the information about her grandmother's parents and gave the wrong grandmother's surname. So instead of it being Charity Bobbitt as the great grandmother of the informant, it's Charity Shrewsbury. Now, I've done enough of that tree to realize she just got the other grandmother's name in there. Charity is correct. The surname is not. So sometimes people misspeak on these records. Sometimes things get confused. Now, on a death record, the cause of death is actually primary source information because that is the reason for the certificate to be issued. The name of the undertaker, the cemetery, and location are typically there. The name of the doctor who's certifying the death. It may again be a register in a big book. Every time you copy information, there is a likelihood that an error or more will creep in. And then if you're in a cemetery, tombstones are great information. This is my great grandparents down in Latta. Check who's buried around them. Now, this is a Rouse plot in the cemetery. And so it is these two, um, his father and stepmother, his uh, Their son is there as well. And so it's just very interesting. You will note, you can kind of see it there at the bottom. Their marriage date is on there. That is the only kind of written in stone that I have their marriage date. So sometimes you find information in very interesting places. However, Carrie, my great grandmother, um, about half of her siblings and her parents are all buried in the next row down for the most part in the cemetery. So it took a minute. I had to look on the back of one of the siblings' tombstones, married sister tombstone on the side I was looking had her married name, and the tombstone on the other side had Alan, and their parents were there. So my great great grandparents are also in that cemetery. So take a look around, see who's also in that cemetery. Here is a South Carolina death certificate. Um, the name, John J. Rouse. 3 of the last 4 generations were John J. Rouses. 2 were John Josephs, and 1 was a John James. This is John James. You will notice that there is a complete blank in that upper left corner as to place of death. You can find where that death occurred by the registration district number with some research. Um, Presumably in Latta, in Dillon County at that point. Um, but John J. Rouse, you get gender, you get color or race, which is white, you get widowed, date of death, February 13th, 1918. You get cause of death, you get who certified it, where they were. He was in Latta, so which is why I'm presuming that's the Latta district. You get a date of birth, which there seems to have been some confusion. I've seen 1841 most of the time. 1846 is written on a census. You get the age with month and years, years, month, and days. And then you get an occupation. He was a clerical person. He was the town of Latta. He was their secretary, treasurer, town clerk. I actually have some letters that he signed in that role. So that was cool. He was born in South Carolina. Kind of helpful, not necessarily great. And then there was some confusion over dad's name, Robert A. Rouse. Chesterfield County. Well, I always thought that Robert A. Rouse was born in Darlington, so that gives me a little bit of information to take a look at. And then Elizabeth McDaniel as mother's name. She was born in Darlington, South Carolina. She, I cannot find a darn thing about. I've found a couple more things in Darlington County. Mrs. Walter, Walter, whatever, Bethay, Walter, Enos, I think, Enoch. Uh, that happens to be John Jay's daughter. Um, and so, Bessie. And so, knowing married names can be helpful. Sometimes you can't place that informant until you've built out your tree a little bit. And then Magnolia Cemetery, which is the cemetery that you just saw. He has a very nice modern, placed in 2012, veteran stone. So sometimes you have to take things with a little grain of salt. Elizabeth's brother, and Fitzhugh, my grandfather's brother, he never gave the same information twice on anything. He was such a politician. So, another resource for obituaries and for death information are going to be funeral programs. This is the inside of a program in a scrapbook that services for Mamie Zirkle up in Maryland. And it does tell you the clergyman, it tells you where she's interred, and it tells you the birth and death dates. So that's helpful. We have a fantastic collection in our online historical digital collections at the library, the Bessie Norris Walford Funeral Program Collection. And these have all been digitized. They are largely for African American decedents. And we're very happy to have gotten them online for researchers because African Americans were in many eras denied obituaries in the newspaper or they were prohibitively expensive. So sometimes the record is just not there unless there happens to be an extant African American newspaper in the area. And unfortunately, we do not have that. But in this, on the front, there is a picture of her, her name, her birth and death dates. Inside, you get the order of service, you get a note of thanks from the family, and you get her obituary. And so this can be extremely important. On the back, it has, I believe, information about the funeral home. So it's one of those things. This is Bessie May Snoddy's, and it is very helpful. So sometimes you need to look in unexpected places because I wouldn't have thought to look at the library for a funeral program collection until we got this in and had it in our collections. Another place that you do find information about deaths and families are probates, settling the estate when somebody dies, if they have at least a decent amount of property, personal and or real land, real estate. Um, the probate gives information about the death of the person and who their legal heirs are. It is a legal process to transfer real and personal property. It's a will as part of the property and part of the probate. And then it tells you who the people are involved in the process. Inventories of the property are often included, down to 3 coverlets and 2 bedsteads and seven spoons and that kind of thing. So you get a real feel for tools and equipment if they were in a trade, or what they might have raised on their property, wool shears. Well, then they probably had sheep. So just different things like that. We'll be talking about wills, probates, and estates in depth in January 2026. Um, just a note about this particular probate that is in the picture. This is of a probate naming the heirs of Elias Allen. And in the abstract that was done a number of years ago, one of the sons, Joel, is his name is not in the abstract. Some random other male name got in the middle of that abstract. And I was trying to prove that Joel and Thompson were indeed the sons of Elias, and I needed the paperwork. So I went down to the Marion County Archives and found this. Now, these papers are in horribly fragile shape. But I was really glad that I was able to get that. And as you can see, with folding and unfolding of them, there is now paper missing. So abstractors are doing very necessary work for us. Transcribers are doing very necessary work for us. AI does necessary work for us, but sometimes you as the researcher need to look at the original if at all possible because mistakes do happen. Auto uncorrect happens. Not so much 30 years ago, but now it does. Such as a will is part of the property. No, a will is part of the probate. So AI is not always our friend. So let's talk a little bit about obituaries. It's another one of those death records that obituaries often name the person who died, their parents, spouse or spouses, children, siblings, other relatives, locations of the above, plus church, cemetery, funeral home. Now you need to look at it. Where is it published? Was it published in multiple places with all of the same information, or were there multiple different versions of the obituary? Gives you dates of the events. Sometimes you have to do a little math. And then it gives you occupations often. Where did they work? Errors in dates, names, and relationships. Some may be typos. Sometimes information is lost in translation from family to funeral home to newspaper. So sometimes, I made a mistake in my grandmother's obituary. We had the wrong marriage year. I knew better. My mother was insistent it was the year we put into a year earlier than it was. Um, and we just didn't catch it. Life happens. Um, but then the newspaper completely messed up the in-laws of a previous um, set of siblings. So it just depends. So a couple of examples of our obituaries. R.A. Rouse, this is in 1895. There was not an obituary section. Quite frankly, obituary sections started coming in maybe in the 20s, 30s, maybe. They started having kind of a usual page at that point. This obituary is literally in the local laconics column. So, i.e., the matters in and around the town of Darlington in the Darlington News. It is a column of news tersely told of interest to our many readers. And you get the top one, Mr. J.N. Span of Sumter is in town on business. And it goes all the way down. And this is at the bottom of that left-hand part of the paper. Mr. R.A. Rouse, who had been paralytic for the past 4 years, died at the factory on Sunday last, in the 80th year of his age, and was buried at Carter's Burying Ground about 5 miles from here on Tuesday. A wife and 6 children survive him. Mr. Rouse was a highly respected citizen. He was born and raised in this county and had been a member of the Methodist Church for many years past. Doesn't tell us a whole lot. It tells us, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot. Wife and 6 children. I'm assuming the 6th child is the stepson from his second marriage, who, quite frankly, he did raise for most of that child's life. But this is that R.A. Rouse who the death certificate of his son said maybe had been born in Chesterfield County. Well, this is implying Darlington County again. So sometimes you have to pick and choose and figure out what you're doing. Now, this is the grandson of R.A. Rouse, the son of John James Rouse that we've already talked about. This is a special to a larger paper. This is in 1915, so the son died 2 years before his father, John Jay. The funeral and interment held Sunday at Latta. Now, this paper was published after the fact. But Fitzhugh Rouse died Saturday evening, Southern Pines, North Carolina. He had tuberculosis. There were sanitariums there. And then they were interred in the Magnolia Cemetery. You saw his stone a little bit ago. Gives us the name of the officiating minister. He was about 35 years of age, had been in declining health for about 2 years, only gave up his work 1 year ago. For 7 years, he was employed by the Marion County Lumber Company as a bookkeeper. He was a young man of fine ability and was well thought of. He was married in January 1902, I think, to Miss Carrie Allen, who with 3 children survive him. Notice the children are not named. He leaves an aged father, Mr. J.J. Rouse, a brother, R.A. Rouse, Superintendent of Education of Chesterfield County, one sister, Mrs. Walter E. Bethay of Latta, and a host of friends. So you're starting to see some of those married names popping in. This is the daughter who was on her father's death certificate. R.A. Rouse, the brother, is the informant on Fitzhugh's death certificate, which literally has an F period Rouse on it. That one took a long time to find because I wasn't looking in North Carolina. So, sometimes you get lucky and a cemetery employer children are named. Sometimes you don't, but you're putting together the pieces. So let's talk about the census. In some places, there are state and local censuses that are very helpful. In Kansas, we had a state census that was on the 5 years from 1855 to 1925. So you had 1855 state census, 1860, and on the even years, you had the federal censuses. So we had a state census on the 5 years before and after the missing 1890 census. Um, you know, sometimes you get lucky. South Carolina really doesn't have state and local censuses. There are a few fragments of a couple of them, 1869 being one of them. So, Virginia had a 1624 census. Um, if your people were there, it can be helpful, but not necessarily every state does them. But federal censuses started in 1790 after we became a country. Federal census is 1790, and we'll look through some examples in just a second. Um, the images here are from the 1980 census, some publicity photos from census.gov. Census.gov has some great resources if you want to find statistics for various things over time. Just if you want to read the directions for the enumerators for each census year every 10 years, you can read exactly what they were supposed to ask through time. And that's the instructions for 1910 on the right hand there. In the census between 1850 and 1950, which is the most recent we have available, 1960 comes out in 2032, 72-year embargo on census information. You can ask later. There's a whole story behind why 72 years. Prior to 1850, so from 1790 to 1840, it is head of household and numbers of gender age status for males and females and enslaved. Locations. Sometimes it asks where they live. Well, you always get where they live because you know where the census was taken, but sometimes it asks where they were born. Every census year has slightly different questions. Um, Often you get education, occupations, military service, and then closer to 1900, you start getting immigration questions. So, in 1810, this is what the federal census looked like. There were always 3 copies. So the copy the enumerator took and 2 additional copies. And so each copy may differ just a little bit, and there may have been transcription errors. Just as a notice. So I pulled this up because I needed an 1810 or 1790, 1800, 1810, 1820 example. So I pulled this up for Elias Allen, and he is about the 5th one down there on the left, Elias Allen. And I did a double take when I pulled this for the example because right below him is Hardy Pittman. Now, what I now know, but I've only known Hardy Pittman's name for about 2 years, I found this 1810 census, probably in 2008, 2009. It's been a long time. And I hadn't really gone back and looked at all of the censuses for all of those people in all of those years, because it's a lot of ancestors on censuses back in 1810. And anyway, what this tells us is that Elias Allen and Hardy Pittman were neighbors in Marion County. Well, Elias's son Thompson and Hardy's daughter Rhoda got married. It's why one of the reasons I'm here. So they were next door neighbors because this is not an alphabetical order. It is in uh, order of houses visited. Often when they did the other copies, they did do an alphabetical because they had to post these because all it is head of household and tick marks for certain age groups, males, you know, under 10, 10 to 16, 16, 17 to 26, 26 to 45, 45 and older, females under 10, 11 to 16, 16, 17 to 26, 27 to 45, and over 45. Other free people and enslaved is that last column. So, um, this has been one of those places. Elias dies in 1821. Hardy dies, I think, now in 1836. I have a land division that happened after his death, which happened in late 1836. And I have a will for Hardy's wife, Amy, in 1848. So it's taken me a long time to get those Pittmans put together. But I didn't, I how else would they have gotten to know each other? They were neighbors. So, all of the censuses from 19 or 1790, get my numbers in the right order, 1790 up until 1860 list the enslaved. 1790, 1800, 1810, and I think 1820, it's just a final column. It does not break the enslaved down into males and females. It just says there. By 1830 and 1840, we're on the back of the page for the free people of color and the enslaved. So you might need to double check that you've pulled the backs of the pages where appropriate. Um, and then 1850 and 1860 have separate slave schedules. So by 1850, they are actually listing all of the members of the household by name. They are not listing how they are related. So 1850 to 1870, it is an implied relationship. They're in the household, and you can make some educated guesses, but know that your educated guess may be incorrect. But down there, that is highlighted is R.A. Rouse with Elizabeth and John Jay and Sarah Jane. Um, and Elizabeth died sometime between the 1850 and 1860 census. In the 1860 census, Robert is married to Charlotte Lucas, who has a son who has the surname of Mercer. Still working on that one. But it asks questions about, their age, gender, color, occupation, whether they got, sorry, value of real estate, um, what location they were born, and then the questions on the right are whether they attended school within the year, whether they are over 20 and cannot read or write, and then the final column asks whether they are deaf and dumb, blind, insane, idiotic, pauper, or convict. All of which were, are you going to be a drain on society? At least in their perspective. 1880, we're jumping a little bit because there are slightly slight differences in here, but not huge differences. And The 1880 census, they're starting to ask more and more questions. It lists the relationship to the head of household. So this is uh John James Rouse. And it does list and question if you were unemployed in the last year. Um, and then it does ask for your place of birth and the place of birth of your parents, at least to the state or country. So again, we're starting to get more immigration into the country. Population has increased over, approximately 100 years now. As I said, 1890 census burned in 1920 something at the Commerce Department. Some fragments exist. Um, and then by 1910, we're getting a lot of extra questions, including immigration status and native language. Between 1880, starting in the 1870s, really, and World War II, we had a significant influx of population from Europe, from Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe and Ireland were not favored. And so they were trying to get a grasp on all of that. You can read all of those headings. Ancestry does have them, Family Search has them blank sheets that you can read the actual headings. Um, so, and then land records might not be the first thing you think of, but they are one of the early records that we as genealogists use to put people in a place at a time. I've done a couple different land programs in the past couple of years. Feel free to go back in the YouTube channel and take a watch those. But land was particularly important in rural areas because if you're a farmer, you need enough good land to be able to feed your family. This is obviously not South Carolina in the image. It was just a stock image I picked. So some things to look for in land records. The names of the seller or grantor and the buyer, also known as a grantee. In South Carolina, I didn't put this in, but South Carolina, it's mean conveyance, MESNE conveyance, um, is what they called land transactions in the early periods. It gives you a location. Where is the property? If you know where the property is and if they were living on that property, you have a better chance of knowing, was there a school nearby? Could they have gone to a school? The kids, what is the nearest church? About 6 miles is the early limit for most people who would be able to get to a church service. Then again, church services may only have been held once a month with a itinerant pastor. Um, but it was an all-day thing because if you're going to spend an hour getting there on your horse and wagon or on your own 2 feet, then you're probably going to stay for a minute and then go home. So it was not always a every week kind of thing like we think of, and nobody was tapping their watch after an hour of service going, we're done, we're ready to go have lunch and then watch football. So, location, where is the property? You get the names of witnesses and neighbors because it will list who the neighboring property owners are. And then sometimes you get relationships, which is great because sometimes you're trying to prove that this person and this person were parent and child. You're also going to want to look for a plat, which is a drawing of the property. So, in our historical digital collections, which are available through the library website, spartanburglibraries.org, we have now digitized most of single and double letter Spartanburg County deed books. Um, we have an agreement with the Register of Deeds to do those two series. There are 25 books per series, so A through Z, and they skip one letter, and I don't remember which it is. Um, just because it was confusing, but also because it's easier to count by 25 than it is by 26. But once they go through single letters, they go back and use double letters, triple letters, whatever. So if somebody says that your deed, like mine, is in, I don't know, 27F, 45F now, something like that, then you go to that series and you look up that book. Even though it's digital now, they do record in the same way because that record set started a long time ago, and it's easier to continue it the way it started. But we have full color copies of our deeds in those early series um, on our website. They're also linked, and indexes are on the Register of Deeds website. Um, and this happens to be a blow up of uh, deed one in on page one of book 1A for Spartanburg County when we were formed in 1785. Charles Moore, yes, that Charles Moore of Walnut Grove Plantation, to Thomas Moore. And I'm hoping I can read it again. This indenture or agreement made the 28th day of November in the year of our Lord 1785, and in the ninth year of American independence, between Charles Moore of Spartanburg County, 96th district in of South Carolina, um, and Thomas Moore, son of Charles Moore, of said Charles Moore. So this is giving father son. So if you needed to prove that connection, of the same county, and he's basically he's selling his son land so that you know it's all straight out. Whatever, just happens to be the first land registered in Spartanburg County, which is kind of cool. So this is in 1837 from Marlborough County. And this is back to those Allens. Elias Allen's widow, Celia, is selling land to her sons, Joel and Thompson. And I'm going to blow it up here. It starts on the bottom part of the page, left-hand page. Um, and Marlborough District, no, this is more common language now. Know all men by these presents that I, Celia Allen of the district and state aforesaid, do give and bequeath to my two sons Thompson W. Allen and Joel Allen a third part of a certain piece or tract of land. So what happened was Elias died in pretty bad straits. The family really limped along for a couple of years. They sold up, they picked up stakes. They moved from Marion County to Marlborough County, and then they sold the land in Marion County and used the proceeds to set up the various children for various things. This particular property, Celia and Thompson and Joel purchased together. As a widow, Celia was able to own land. Single women generally were restricted from owning land, as were married women. And so she is selling that third of this property that the three of them jointly owned, dividing it between the two sons. And it goes through the entire list of all of the prior owners of this land, which is really good if you're person is one of those prior owners and you're trying to track that property. So, you can find out a lot about the neighbors. Sometimes the first time you look at these records, you don't know all of those surnames. Sometimes you don't recognize something that's important, like that whole Chesterfield versus Darlington. I think it's just as she was mistaken and said the wrong thing because her brother lived in Chesterfield, but I need to go back and look at that. So sometimes it gives you clues to go back when some pieces are not fitting together correctly. So, questions. And I think I did see out of the corner of my eye a question come across the chat. So,
You did indeed. It's from Heather.
okay.
And let's see, it says, what is the best practice when there are two obituaries and they have conflicting information?
Oh, yes. And it conflicts with anything else you know, or there isn't anything that you can find that would break the stalemate. Um, One thing to look at is how conflicting is the information. If obituary one was put in the primary newspaper and you get one date calculated off of that, um, then you have the derivative that's special, like special to the state or special to the Charleston News and Courier, that kind of thing. And the thing says Sunday last. Well, you have to figure out when the publication dates of those papers were, because sometimes Sunday last really means 2 weeks ago. So if you're talking a date, sometimes it can be a little interesting. If you're talking a name, sometimes it can be as simple as somebody at the typesetters at the newspaper got it wrong, or they left a name in from the last time they used that line of type. Sometimes I have seen it more than once now. Um, Sometimes there are two obituaries in two different areas that have two different families, and there really were two different families. So I know. Um, and I don't know what other conflicting information. I have seen in-laws listed as siblings, and it's very confusing. And it was never corrected. There was never a whatever. Some families don't care. They list biological foster step grandchildren raised in the home all as their kids. And that can be very, very confusing when you're trying to parse out who is really who and where do they fit in the family tree. I hope that got the answer, Heather. I mean, like anything else, you look for additional sources of information. That would be the other thing. If all you have is two dueling obituaries, see if you can find a death certificate, see if the funeral home has records, see if the cemetery has any records, because sometimes that will help tell what's the actual information and what was misspoken.
Charity, you've got one more
Um,
question.
okay.
It's, can you reproduce these records if you're writing an article?
If you are being paid to write an article, you have to follow copyright and copyright permissions. So generally the answer is no. I am able to present and show some of these records because I am presenting on behalf of a nonprofit institution for educational purposes. So now, that said, if you are writing an article for a genealogy society newsletter or something like that, you can transcribe, you can get permission of the place you found the piece the record. Um if it is a public document, such as you went to the courthouse and got a copy of it yourself, unless they put restrictions on it, then that is um, publishable if you credit it, because that's public record. Um, but know that some states and some offices get really picky about that. Um, Trying to think what other documents. Um, I mean, honestly, you might want to do just part of a document, not the entire document, because that's a lot of paper and a lot of space. And census records in particular, while they are available, um, the digital copies that we have access to are the property of the institution that digitized it. So Ancestry owns their images, Family Search owns their images, um, National Archives owns their images. You just have to put where you found it and the copyright inform the use information. There's a statement that the National Archives will give you for some things. I when I was taking pictures of records at the National Archives last January, there was a specific record release number that had to be with that record and has to go with it with the citation, to demonstrate that it is a legal copy gotten within their restrictions, because there are some things that they have to redact in military records, and these had been cleared, but they have to be able to prove that it had been cleared. So,
What about letters, Charity?
the letters are the copyright of the person who wrote them, not necessarily the person who received them. It can get a little sticky, but if they are no longer alive, then you are usually in the clear. If someone is alive whose letter you are trying to reproduce, I would take the extra step of getting their permission. It's just courtesy.
Yeah.
Now, that said, we've got a couple of great collections in the room where someone has taken their parents' correspondence during World War I or World War II and transcribed and compiled. Um, Not photocopied all of them, but transcribed them, which is a derivative work, but they have given credit to, but the people who are in the letters are largely deceased or don't care that they got mentioned in Aunt Sue's letter. So it's a matter of making sure that you're being not outing someone's secret who is still alive if there's something in there that might be questionable. So, um, but yeah, letters get interesting. School yearbooks we can digitize because the school owns the copyright for the compiled page. The photographer may own the compilation for or the copyright for their image, but once it is put on that page in that context, the school is the one that holds copyright permission. Um, and so we've been able to digitize yearbooks, but we've done it with the permission of current school administration for the district. So, yeah, it's just thinking through, if is there anything in this information that might hurt someone who's still living. Um, I have a friend who I've done research for, and their grandparents have a great marriage license from West Virginia in 1932. They have an additional marriage license from just over the state line in Virginia in 1962. And it was a big old scandal because apparently they went to get her on Social Security or register for a Social Security card, and it was discovered that he was not exactly divorced at the time of their 1932 wedding. So, things like that happen. I can be more open about that because those two people and all of their children are now deceased. and the grandchildren think it's hysterical. So again, it's that. Um, so yeah. Hopefully, I answered the copyright question.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there's nothing else in the chat.
Okay.
But thank you very much for an
Yes.
informative
And next
program.
month, December 1st, right after Thanksgiving weekend, we'll be working with DNA results, and it will be a case study showing how you go back and forth with your tree and your DNA results and figure out who's who. And then again in January, I'll be talking about wills, estates, and probate records again that first Monday. So thank you so much for being here, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay. I'm not seeing the thing where I can stop the recording. Is that under share?
There, I just found it.
You did?